Laura Shigihara is a much-loved name in the world of VGM. Her composing work continues to this day, after an impressive career writing for well-known releases like Plants vs Zombies. She's collaborated with C418 and Undertale's Toby Fox, regularly streams live music to a dedicated audience, and has even designed her own game, Rakuen. Styled as a 2D RPG adventure, Rakuen follows the emotional journey of an unnamed boy and his mother. Hospitalised by a difficult illness, the boy finds solace in stories of a magical land. But as it turns out, the book his mother reads from isn't entirely based in fiction. Through visits to Rakuen's vivid fantasy world, the two embark on a personal tale of empathy and understanding, filled with memorable characters. As the narrative unfolds, music becomes integral to the experience. Melodies tie directly into plot threads and help drive gameplay in some inventive ways. You'd expect nothing less from Laura Shigihara, who took on the score for Rakuen alongside several other duties, including writing. That allowed for a deep connection between the script and its eventual OST, possibly best heard in a number of fan-favourite vocal tracks. I'm Lee Tyrrell, and this is the Sound Test, where I look in depth at video game audio and music, along with the very people who crafted it. In this case, I'm joined for a third and final time by Laura Shigihara herself. Throughout this podcast, we'll explore some of Rakuen's key themes and what inspired them. There are also a few details about story beats, including the ending, so be warned of upcoming spoilers. Funnily enough, talking about the origins of Rakuen inevitably leads to one of the last pieces heard by players. So how did it all begin? And what influenced Laura's move into game design?
The whole game actually started out of the ending credits song, which is called Jump. I originally ended up writing that song and then using it for the Play for Japan album. And when I was arranging the song, I kind of thought about, okay, what's this song about, And I think one of the themes I had in mind was, in life, we don't know, what's going to happen next. We don't know, how a new job is going to be, or a new relationship, or moving somewhere new. But we just have to try our best and kind of go for it. And I think the other idea I had was that sometimes in life we just want to be told that everything's going to be okay. Even as adults, I think when we're kids, our parents tell us that, don't worry, no matter what you're going through, it's very comforting to hear your parents say, or whoever's taking care of you, it's going to be all right, it's okay. And as adults, I don't think we have that as much. And, sometimes, people will be sick and they'll have some really difficult stuff going on in their lives, and they want someone to tell them it's going to be okay. And so I sort of had those two things in mind when I wrote the song. Towards the end of it, too, I started imagining a little story about a boy living in the hospital and his mom reading to him from a storybook and kind of helping him escape to this world. They braided bed sheets and climb out the window and go to this fantasy world, and she eventually takes him to this boat. And so my friend Emmy, who I met her at EA. She's an artist on My Sims and Sims, and we were talking about it, and we're like, yeah, it'd be so fun to do a little animated music video. And she ended up moving, and when she showed me a bunch of preliminary sketches for the video, and I was like, oh, I love your art so much. Like, we should just, we shouldn't just do a video, we should do a game. So that's kind of how it was born out of those things. So in that case, music was there, from the get-go, was there even before the game started.
It's no surprise that music was a part of Rakuen from the very beginning. Laura is, of course, a composer first and foremost, but passion for VGM in general has often informed her art. You can hear more about Laura's history with game soundtracks in a previous episode of this series, covering Plants vs. Zombies, where we specifically discuss Mega Man and its enduring influence. As a result, much of Rakuen contains traditionally instrumental tunes, with an emphasis on piano. However, lyrical tracks are a recurring feature in Laura's work too, and Jump, heard over the credits, is far from alone on the OST. Build a Little World with Me, a delicate, tender song with an emotional punch, regularly comes up as a highlight, given all the more weight by its place in the story.
That's actually probably one of my favorite songs that I've written. It was largely inspired by my relationship with my best friend, and also just thinking about, I actually did not write that one first like I did with Jump or some of the other themes. It came about after I was developing the relationship between Boy and Sue, and I thought a lot about the little world that they had together, because you know how she does that, when she's in kind of like a terrible situation. So she has this whole jar full of marbles, each one representing a world that she kind of escaped to during some difficult part of her life. And I think at that part of my life, I was going through some really difficult things, and it was kind of this thing where I sort of concurrently thought about real life as well as the story and the interaction between Boy and Sue, and trying to put that into words, that, even though there's all bad things going around, that somehow each of them kind of shines light into the other person's life, and that even if their time together is very, very short, that they'll still, treasure that time, and that it was still very, very meaningful to have each other during those moments.
While songs like Build a Little World with Me base their lyrics on the game itself, they take just as much from reality. There's a strongly relatable, beating heart at the centre of Rakuen, and that's exactly why players are so affected by its themes. Laura filled the narrative with humanity and understanding, which can be heard in practically every note of her soundtrack. In order to capture those feelings, where did she draw from for the final script and the music that scored it?
My dad's side of the family is actually from Sendai in the Tohoku region, and I spent a lot of time just reading articles about local people and crazy things that people did to band together afterwards. Like, there was this one guy who he couldn't find his wife or his mom, so he actually went and got scuba gear and went out searching for them and found and rescued both of them. And after that, kind of took up this thing where he went out and he was helping find missing people. And thinking about the mom character, I think a lot of people, when they first start playing, think, oh, she's just a side character. She's just there to follow the boy around. But then, by the end of the game, you see she's the one who actually manifests a lot of the theme at the very end. And in order to take care of young children, they put so much of themselves aside. They can make this safe space for the kid. And I think it's so noble, and I think it's very difficult. And when I think about that, just the idea of people hiding things that they have going on, deep-seated stuff, I think how important it is for people to have empathy and for people to just care about other people. And so when I processed all of that, I'm just like, okay, I do want people to feel things. I kind of wanted to move people in a direction where it would make them want to feel for other people and thinking about what they're going through. And maybe after they play, they'll be like, oh, this person's kind of cranky and mean, but maybe they're going through something really difficult. When you're doing a game where there's 2D pixel animation and you want to really make it as immersive as possible. So I think music plays a huge role in all of that. And I think also in shaping kind of the personalities of the characters and in shaping the experiences that they had.
Set in a hospital and following the life of an ill young boy, Rakuen was always going to deal with some weighty topics. Yet, the game has its fair share of whimsy and wonder, colourfully expressed through a mystical land that comes straight from the boy's favourite storybook. It makes for a stark contrast to the grey walls that usually surround him, and the confinement of living in a small, featureless medical ward. That contrast can be clearly heard in Laura's music, which deliberately gets more playful as you enter the book's enchanting fantasy world.
One of the biggest elements was the dreariness versus the kind of upbeat, happy feel. So the hospital music, when you're first there, is kind of, there's something about it that is a little bit like, not depressing so much, but dreary. It just feels monotonous, like the same things happen day in and day out for this boy, and I sort of wanted to capture that feel of like what the patients that are there, long-term feel like. That sometimes it's kind of depressing being there for a long time. And so I think that also, like, there's a lot of desaturated colors used in the artwork. When you go over to the fantasy world, it'd be like this big burst of color, and I wanted the music to be super upbeat, and I just wanted it to have this like very big contrast. Like even the way that you feel during the eerie parts or the scary parts, or those sorts of sections, you feel a lot more. It's like a much stronger emotion, whereas the hospital is very, very muted, because I just wanted that contrast of feeling nothing to feeling a lot of things.
In the background, Laura's music always underlines the setting and characters, but it takes a bigger role too as an integral part of gameplay. While the boy interacts with fellow patients and their fantastical alter egos, he encounters songs and melodies that represent them. Their short ditties are heard again as Rakuen concludes, so be warned that this next section features a few small spoilers about the ending. With that in mind, what do the 5 individual character songs mean to the story as a whole, and how did Laura develop them?
One of the things I wanted to do was, how in the game you help different people in the hospital, and then kind of through interacting with their alter egos, you learn about their story and their unfinished business. And then I wanted that each of them would have some kind of a little song that matched the character and matched their resolved, unfinished business, in a sense that you would get kind of like this completion feeling at the end of each arc. And I thought it would be really neat if at the end, like, each of those songs was made up of a individual melody that when combined together would make like this 5-part harmony. And I thought it'd be neat because it kind of symbolizes that the boy finds meaning in his life, I think, through helping these people and realizing by empathizing and being there for them, like, actually makes a huge difference in their lives. And in the end, it kind of all comes back and gives them strength in a sense. And I just really wanted to do something like that, where I could merge the melodies together and merge the stories together, to show that we're all in it together.
If you brush your teeth and you get good grades, I will be so proud. Maybe I'll even shout out loud or do a funny dance. Ha ha ha. Even though I go far away for work.
I wanted each one of the individual songs to really match the character. So, for example, Tony's song, the older guy, like it's kind of a goofy kid song that I wanted it to sound like it was made by a guy who's not a singer or songwriter. Just the kind of silly song a dad would make up to his for his little kid. Whereas I wanted the final song to sound like a lullaby, and that was really fun to work on, I think.
Close your eyes. It is time for you to tell the world good night. It might be dark inside, but there are still stars shining in the sky. Close your eyes. I am here, and everything will be alright. I am right here by your side as we go walking through the night.
Rakuen's 5 key melodies mesh together perfectly for Mori no Kokoro, which eventually brings them all together. They also have a subtle influence on other pieces in Laura's score, cropping up multiple times and in various ways. For example, composers often adapt tunes into a minor key, and can completely change how they feel as a consequence. Sprinkling a theme across several pieces is great for a sense of coherence, even if players perceive it subconsciously.
I actually had the 5 themes written before I started working on each of them, so I would have kind of a guide for myself. So throughout the different sections, it's kind of an emotional roller coaster. There are a lot of different parts. There's certain sections that are scary or creepy or sad or happy or delightful, like a lot of different emotions. And Tony's theme, for example, the dun dun da da da, anytime there was like a happy section, I could keep the melody basically the same. But while you're wandering around the house, I sort of wanted it eerie, like foreboding atmosphere where something bad happened. And it's not really so much about what that thing was, it's more about how they handled it afterwards and the fallout. Sometimes I would put a lot of little half steps in and a little there's some cacophony going on to kind of distort the main theme a little bit. I do the same thing in Kisaburo's arc, where you hear a very happy moment where the melody is integrated, but then you also have a very kind of scared, sad section as well.
Although the 5 melodies are short in their original form, they're still able to capture the essence of a character's personality. In Kisaburo's case, that's achieved with the use of specific instrumentation. Yours, which features Dale North on vocals, prominently features the soft plucks of a koto. Its sound is unmistakably Japanese, mirroring Kisaburo's nationality, while holding personal significance to Laura as well.
My love, oh my only, you're everything to me. I have tried all my life.
The koto is one of the instruments I wanted to use because I think it's just very, when you hear it, it's very like a Japanese kind of sound or an Eastern sound. And so, like Kisaburo section, for example, he's a much more, like traditional, kind of Japanese style. He's a lot older. Tony is not Japanese, but Kisaburo is. I wanted to make sure to include those things in that section, just because I think it kind of shaped that cultural aspect. Kisaburo is actually my paternal grandfather, and my grandmother lost him at a pretty young time, and she had one of the little kind of altar things where she would put like an orange there every day for him. I learned that when I went to go visit her at some point, and she told me that, and I teared up because I was like, oh my gosh, she's loved him for so many years, even after he passed, and I thought that was really sweet. And during that time, I also listened to like a lot of music, and I wanted to integrate some of that stuff in, so that's why I wanted to use that instrument. Because a lot of the stuff that she listened to had that in there. A lot of like traditional enka music would utilize the koto.
Besides the koto, there's more traditional influence to be found in Rakuen's soundtrack. Many of its central melodies are confined to 5-note pentatonic scales, which I've discussed on the sound test before. Such scales are highly evocative of historic Japanese music, and were often strictly adhered to by Eastern composers. Rakuen's OST isn't so rigid, instead using pentatonic themes alongside other scales.
So like that, I'm not sure if you could hear that, but that transitioning of fourths and the melody, like that kind of stuff. There's certain spaces, like if you watch my parents would watch these old samurai films. I think it's because of the way that the older instruments are structured that gives those sounds. But then carried over, when you play it on the piano, you can play that same separation of notes. It gives that same feel. My dad liked to listen to that kind of music a lot.
Specific musical scales can be wonderful at expressing emotion, and emotion is exactly what drives Rakuen. Laura drew on her own personal experiences for the script and soundtrack alike, which is why they work so well. It would take a heart of stone to get through the game without feeling, especially in its final moments, where players are presented with a truly profound conclusion. The ending is largely scored by a single piano, and uses recognisable melodies from earlier in the narrative. Though the writing is undoubtedly stirring on its own, the last scene's soundtrack practically guarantees an emotional response.
Whenever I write music, it's always kind of tied to a thought or a feeling. So for example, the Kasan-e, the song that you hear during the boat scene, like that one I had composed pretty early on. And so I just go to the piano and I would play that theme and visualize what happened at the end of the game, because I knew the ending first and kind of worked backwards.
When you put so much of yourself into a project, as Laura did with Rakuen, it's natural to be nervous about how it's received. That's only going to be magnified when it's your first full game release too. In the end, Rakuen lived up to its premise and intentions, garnering universal acclaim from both players and critics. It owes a lot of that positive reaction to strong writing and art, but, as ever, the music is key to achieving that all-important lump in the throat. Laura wanted to truly reach people with her story, and that same emotional intensity can be heard at every step of the experience.
Actually, when I released it, I was fully expecting that maybe there'd be a few people who liked it, but I was afraid, the particular style of gameplay, point and click adventures with puzzles is kind of polarizing. I played Maniac Mansion and Shadowgate and a lot of those old kind of point and click games. I like puzzles. And I also remember thinking, oh, will people get through the stories and not relate at all? And so I think when there was positive reception and when people wrote to me and were saying things, I got some super nice messages from folks. Someone said that they had, kind of a bad thing happen in their life and they just walled up and they couldn't cry and they weren't, they couldn't properly release the emotions that they had from that event. But then they said after playing the game, they just cried for a long time and then they felt like it was a release for them. And that made me feel so happy that it could help somebody.
Thanks to Laura for speaking to me for the sound test, but thank you too for taking the time to listen. If you've enjoyed what you've heard, please make sure to follow or subscribe on whatever platform you may be listening on. There are still many episodes to come in this second series, and the first season is freely available through most popular podcast providers. Due to some last-minute interviews, the racing special I advertised in my previous edition has been delayed. However, it's now set to come alongside a brand new bonus interview with Tim Wright, otherwise known as Cold Storage, who has worked on huge racing franchises like Wipeout. After that, I will be releasing my fully fledged racing special, featuring TDK, Steve Rocket, and Ian Livingston. So stay up to date with the sound test on Facebook and at GreenT128 on Twitter. Finally, if you'd like to hear my podcasts early, ahead of public release, head on over to patreon.com/_secret cave. There, you can pledge your support for as little as £1 or $1 to unlock early access to podcasts, unedited interviews, full quality WAV files, a full backlog of otherwise unavailable live shows, and more. Either way, I hope you enjoyed this edition of ST2, and don't forget to join me every Friday, 7 PM UK time, for a live and interactive show of VGM Celebration.